Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for coming to our first Women in Apprenticeship, IT and Engineering webinar. This is the first in a series of 4 webinars that we will run this academic year. My name is Therese Fitzgerald, and I work on the TU Dublin Access to Apprenticeship programme, and I'm part of the team that helps to organise these webinars. And I'm very much privileged to be moderating the first event of this academic year. This panel discussion is being broadcast to TU Dublin students, second level students, and students in further education and training. So you're all very welcome today. Please feel free to comment and ask questions in the chat, and we'll try and address them throughout the session. The title of today's webinar is A Call for Action. How can apprenticeship programs, computing, and engineering tackle issues around climate change and sustainability? A topic that is extremely relevant to all of us. And I'm delighted to welcome our panel of experts who will be discussing how their organizations are addressing the issues of climate change and sustainability, and discussing what impact these areas could have on education and training, and how climate change and sustainability might influence career prospects for students. On that note, I'm delighted to welcome Joan Byrne, Director of Customer Support and Launch at WorkHuman. Welcome, Joan. Matt Kennedy, Associate Director for Ireland's Carbon and Climate Change Team. Welcome, Matt. Luke O'Mahony, Operational Visibility and Mapping Technology Lead for the ESB. Welcome, Luke.
Thank you.
And Anita Barshney from SAP, Global Vice President, spearheading SAP's strategy on sustainability management. Welcome, Anita. Thank you all for joining us today and for giving up your valuable time. We really appreciate it. I would now just like to ask Rebecca, one of my colleagues, to pop in there and just to tell everyone about the survey. That's okay.
Hi everybody, delighted to be here. Thank you so much. Yes, we have a very short questionnaire we're going to share with you all after this event. Your input, opinions and feedback is really valuable for us to shape future events. So it's really quick, like 3-4 minutes, and we really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Rebecca. And before we start the panel discussion, I'd like to welcome Leslie Schumacher, who will be giving the opening remarks. Leslie coordinates the STEAM mentoring program and is the SARE academic lead and the driving force behind these initiatives. Welcome, Leslie.
Thank you, Therese. Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in today, whether you're in a classroom, at home, or even at work. I just want to take a moment to thank those who've helped to plan and organize this webinar series, which started last year in response to not being able to run any face-to-face activities. This cross-campus initiative has been a great success, and it's a real testament to our viewers across Ireland and to this team about how we've navigated these last 18 months. I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce the amazing team of women who have developed and created our events last year and are helping to put together this year's cross-campus discussion series. We have Rebecca Jones, who you just met. She's the pre-entry officer in the Access and Civic Engagement Office, and she's also the coordinator of the Building Esteem program. We also have Michelle Luby, who is a senior lecturer in engineering in Blanchardstown, and she's one of the founding members of WIT2, which is Women in Technology United. Amy Moles is also here, and she's a lecturer in our Tala campus in electrical and electronic engineering. And finally, we have Therese, our moderator, who's the project officer for the Access to Apprenticeship program, and she's the coordinator for Women Building the Future Network. This takes us to why we're here today. Climate change and sustainability are 2 areas that are increasingly growing in importance in our daily lives. The links between climate change and sustainable development are very strong. For example, global warming is expected to impact the availability of our much needed resources, such as food and fresh water. This is requiring us to look at how we make our lives and future plans more sustainable to protect the very things we need to survive. McDonald's is one example of a company who's trying to do their part by recycling plastic toys to make playground equipment. They're also using paper cups to recycle them into greeting cards. Today, our speakers are going to help us understand more about these 2 topics and what we can do to create a better future, not just for ourselves, but for the upcoming generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. I think you've really set the scene for a very exciting panel discussion. And just to say that it's been a real privilege to work with all this team for the last year, and delighted that we're able to continue these panel discussions. Without further ado, I would like to start the panel discussion, and I would like to do this by asking each panelist the same question. So to start with, it would be great to hear about some of the approaches that your company and organization is taking to address sustainability and climate change. And Anita, we might go to you first.
Thank you so much, and a very warm welcome from my side as well to all the listeners who are tuning in. I think it's an incredible opportunity and a very important topic for all of us to go deeper into and really start to understand as climate change is becoming extremely critical all around us. So what is SAP doing? Now that's a very, very big question, and I would go over an hour explaining on that. So I think at a very high level, there are two most important things that we focus on. First of all, looking at our own operations. How do we set, walk the talk on sustainability, looking at our own operations, our emissions, on how we look at employees. So for us, our own sustainability and how we are, setting the tone for the industry is extremely important. So the very first thing that we do is look at the exemplar side of things. The second and the most important one is, I would say, the enabler side of things on how we are creating products and services for our customers so that they are able to transform into a new world where they are running sustainable business operations, right? So you took an example from McDonald's, but there are so many customers of ours who have been running operations where they're optimizing on efficiency and on profits. But the planetary impact, the community impact has all been left behind. And that's where our products can make a very big difference. Today, we are here talking about climate change, but equally important are the other topics, right? So when we talk about climate change, for us, it's about how do we help our customers manage their emissions, their environmental footprint. We talk about zero waste, and here we talk about how do we make sure that we are helping our customers on the circular economy business models. We talk about social responsibility, and that is also becoming extremely important on how do you really treat your employees, not only within your own organization, but across your entire value chain. And finally, I think all of us are just facing COP26 in just a couple of weeks. And that's where I think these mandatory disclosures from companies on how transparent are they on their own ESG practices is becoming extremely important. So the ESG reporting topic is the another topic that we focus at. So in all these different dimensions, we are helping our customers, no matter where they are in their maturity. Ultimately, we want to help them go on this path where we are actually helping build a better world for our own employees, but also for the future, right? Which all of us belong to. That how do you make sure it's done in the positive way? So I will share more about the climate change, but here are the broad pillars that SAP is focusing on.
Thank you, Anita. It's really reassuring to hear the kind of work that you're doing and to know that you're trying to help customers manage their emissions. So thank you for sharing, and I'm excited to hear what else you have to say. Matt, maybe we can go to you next and you can tell us a little bit about what ARP are doing.
Yeah, thank you. And it's also a pleasure to be speaking this afternoon. What ARP is doing, we're doing two things. We're taking some leadership ourselves in terms of going on a net zero journey to 2030 and understanding what that means for the operations and the business. But even more importantly, we're trying to apply that in terms of credible advice to our clients. So the first bit is, my sense is that we all have a role to play in terms of mitigating the impacts of climate. It isn't just a role for government. And there's a tendency around climate negotiations and to think that government will provide leadership. They will. But the idea of closing the emissions gap and achieving a temperature goal of 1.5 to 2 degrees, the private sector plays a large role in that, as does academia and as does government itself. It's really about acknowledging that the resources that we have are quite finite, and we do need new practices, new behaviors to understand where those emissions are. So as an example of things that ARP has done, we're of course greening our buildings, introducing more green electricity. We're stripping out a lot of the waste, and we're changing our business behavior. We're engaging with our suppliers in terms of emissions reductions, all the things as a responsible business you would expect. But where I see the benefits will come is in terms of the credible advice that we will give to our clients. There's a tendency to think at the moment around, by focusing on carbon, you'll actually get you'll get the right pathway and achieve the goals for the Paris Agreement. And I think the conversation around sustainability is much wider than carbon. Okay, we can provide leadership, but ultimately it's about preserving some ecological stability. And what that means is social value, improving health and well-being. It is about better air quality. It's about building more rigorous and stronger economies. Now, people view Arup as maybe a designer, an organization that can influence infrastructure and buildings. And I think that's really where we're trying to provide more value. It's about designing out the waste and the pollution in terms of buildings and infrastructure around the built environment, and doing that as early a stage as possible, and keeping all of our products and the materials in use for longer. And then when you actually deliver projects, then you actually look at the circularity of all the materials in them. From just the final point I'd make is that when we give advice in terms of designing, say, for example, one of the recent Terminal 2 was an Arup design as an example. What we want to be considering is, how can we use those materials or repurpose those materials for future use? How do you make sure that that building can withstand different temperatures and impact? How can you ensure that you've done the right risk assessments in terms of future climate impacts? So in many ways, you're building an infrastructure piece so you can actually break it down and throughout its whole life cycle and actually repurpose it and repurpose a lot of the materials. And I think that's where we need to be considering from the very start what carbon goes into things, but also what impact biodiversity will play, what impact it has in terms of social norms and the importance of well-being, but ultimately the projects themselves, minimizing all the materials, having more circularity, and actually getting the best gain you can if you are going to build infrastructure.
Thanks, Matt. Again, it sounds like you're doing really proactive work in this area. And I suppose that you're really thinking about it in the long term, which is great. And I really liked what you said, that it's everybody's responsibility in some way. Everybody has a role to play. And maybe, Joan, we might go to you next, just so you can tell us a little bit about what WorkHuman is doing in this area.
Sure, Trace. Thank you very much. Great to be part of the first online panel discussion for your students. This is great. I think, even in the first two presentations there, I mean, already you can see just how vast this is. The good thing is that even from what Anita was saying, you're going to see some links, you're going to see some consensus and common areas that we're all looking at. But first off, I just want to explain what WorkHuman is. We are a social recognition and continuous performance management platform. And we have over 5 million users around the globe. And our mission is to make work more human for every person on our planet. So because of that, we absolutely take huge responsibility around the global impacts of our activities and our actions on society and the environment. So there's a few different areas that we're looking at. And, it's constantly evolving. But from just the responsibility of our employees, we look at continuously making strides across all areas of the business and our sustainability practices. And we're going to touch a little bit on some of the things that even Anita was talking about, which is around the shifting from our physical gift cards to digital. And that's in our e-commerce space. We would have continuous improvement on our recycling programs in our offices. And that's around the elimination of single-use utensils and plates and all of that type of wear. I think a lot of the colleges have already adapted to that. Work-based flexibility. So, I mean, the COVID pandemic, we can't have this discussion, I think, without the changes that have been accelerated through the COVID pandemic, where people are now looking to remotely work. And so flexibility from all companies is very important, and work humans support the flexibility for working remotely. We don't yet know what positive impact that's going to have on the environment, but that's something that's absolutely going to be looked at and grown upon. And then, of course, you have the donations on unused electronics to help organizations in need. So we're constantly looking at that, and we have an ERG, an employee resource group, which we call Live Green. And that focuses on the sustainability to accelerate the ideas and actions of our employees and take it across the entire company. So it brings everybody into the picture. It's around building the knowledge around sustainability. It's around gathering the ideas of what we can do on a daily basis. And then as well, we've got those net zero aims. And that's where we're currently determining our full emissions footprint. And knowledge is power. So we're at the early stages of that analysis. And so we're going to be growing that. We're going to be making sure that we know what it is, and then set the baseline and put some actions in place for improvements. And then lastly, we have become a new member of a charter member of the Sustainable Business and Enterprise Roundtable. And what that is a consortium led by a sustainability consulting firm, and that works with dozens of large companies. And it's even in those type of areas, consultancy, which is where we're going to see some opportunities as well for students to aspire to get involved in a lot of the sustainable activities. So that's it to begin with. It's growing. It's growing.
Thanks, Joan. Again, fascinating. It's great to hear those practical approaches that you're taking at work, and great to know that you have an employee resource group, Live Green. And of course, I think you're right in saying that really resonated with me when you said knowledge is power, and that's why hopefully everyone's tuning in today to learn more. So thanks very much, Joan. And lastly, Luke, we might pass over to you so you can tell us a little bit about what's happening in the ESB in regards to climate change and sustainability.
Yeah, thanks very much. Well, there are a number of measures that ESB Group and ESB networks are taking to address climate change and sustainability. And one of the biggest and one of the most recent is the project that I'm working on, which is called the National Network Local Connections Programme. This programme was launched recently by the Minister for Environment, Climate and Communications, Eamon Ryan. And the overall aim of this programme is to address the government's Climate Action Plan for 2030 by facilitating the decarbonisation of heat transport, which accounts for about 40% of Ireland's carbon emissions, and also by allowing customers to participate in local energy markets. So what we know right now is that ESB Networks has 2.4 million customers, and by 2030 there will be 1 million electric vehicles, which equates roughly to 1 in 2 customers. And we also know that by 2030 there will be 600,000 heat pumps in people's houses, which equates to 1 in 4 customers. So ESB knows that this new demand is coming. ESB knows the customers want to make more informed choices about how they use their energy. And ESB knows the customers want to be involved in the climate solution. So what are we doing right now? What we're doing right now with this project is we're putting in place the technology, the markets and the communications infrastructure that will enable customers to participate in the market with their new low carbon technologies. And this project that we're undertaking is a €4 billion network investment out to 2025. So that's all really very good, but it's quite abstract. So how might this work in real terms? Well, if you think about the traditional household, there would be a car with a combustion engine, maybe 2. Home heating would be provided by gas, oil or solid fuels. And it wouldn't really have been typical to see solar panels or a small wind turbine up on the house. But in order for us to decarbonise heat and transport and hit the government's climate action plans, these things all have to change. So in the house of tomorrow, or it could be argued that it's turning into the house of today, really, customers will have solar PV panels, they'll have electric vehicle chargers, battery storage and heat pumps. And if a customer wants to charge their electric vehicle and make an informed decision to only charge their car when there's a lot of renewable energy in their local network, they'll be able to do this. They'll be able to do this by logging into an app on their phone, and they can see the mix of renewables in their local network at that time. Equally, if a customer wants to sell their excess electricity from their solar PV panels, they'll be able to do that too and get a rate for it. So these new systems allow for greater integration of customer low carbon technologies. And as they are more widely adopted by the public, this will decarbonise heat and transport in a very big way. And these new systems and this project invites customers to be part of the climate solution.
Thanks, Luke. That's really interesting, and you presented it in a really simple way, which was good for me. And I'm really excited, like that there will be a system like that, and that like customers will be able to have their input. So thanks very much for sharing. And I might actually, there was obviously questions submitted in advance. There was an option, and there was a particular question put in for you, Anita. So I'm going to go back over to you. And why is sustainability important in climate change? If you're happy to address that one.
So I think for all of us who are part and looking around us, the floods, the temperatures, I think it makes a no-brainer for any of us that climate action is absolutely important. Matt touched upon the number of key players who are involved in making such a transformation happen. And I think as we go forward, not only climate change, but the other areas like the circular, like the social responsibility will come on the top of private sector's agenda. So I think if you look at the world around us, the businesses, they need to absolutely act. Luke explained a very simple house example, but if you apply the same to an enterprise, how do businesses run today versus how will they run tomorrow? It's about how looking at the impact on the emission, the energy needs, right? If you look at SAP, we ourselves are operating on green cloud since 2014, because it was already an early realization for SAP that first we need to look at our own emissions, our own environmental footprint, and then we think about bringing these products also to our customers. And I mean, the other important thing that you would see, of course, we are all surrounded by the announcements, the net zeros, and the announcements from the governments, right? But I think unless each of the players is taking concrete action in moving comprehensively towards these announced ambitions, only then we can see progress. So whether it's our role as technology providers that SAP is rolling out products and capabilities for our customers to bring visibility on their environmental footprint, or it's about the regulators, the standard makers who have asked companies to be more open about their emissions, right? And what is the path they're actively taking to reduce their emissions? It's no longer just there that you have a net zero target, but you have to back it up with a concrete plan. If you are in a carbon intensive industry, even more so, because the customers expect it from you that you are actively driving change, not only within your own company, but across your entire value chain. And that's where I think I go back to, again, the important role of each of the players in this ecosystem. So just as we build products to bring this efficiency and transparency externally, we also work with players across the value chain. So the WBCST project that we are doing, it's about having that emissions data shared, in a trusted way across with suppliers, your vendors, and your customers. So I think with each of us presenting our own unique strengths, with us, it's the visibility on data, and how do you as businesses take action on reducing that environmental footprint. So I think the business, the customers, the climate, it's all pressurizing us to kind of move forward, but also be transparent and accountable for it, right? Because I think one of the panelists mentions, right, that it's companies would be held, accountable for the emissions that they are disclosing. So I think with all these movements happening in the market, we can only see the pressures on the businesses to be transparent on their data, on their emission side, to show how they are driving this climate action, and finally, how they are joining hands with the rest of the ecosystem, the academia, the governments, the policymakers, to really make that climate change a reality.
Thanks, Anita. I really took away some of the things that you say. I would have to say I'm not an expert in this area, but I mean, yeah, like it feels like we talk about it a lot. So I think it really resonated to me when you're saying things like people need to be accountable and have a concrete plan, and to put plans in place so that businesses and everybody, it's a universal approach, is accountable. And maybe that kind of nicely brings us on to a question that was put in for you, Matt, which is, how do we know what we have started to do is having a positive impact on climate change and sustainability?
Yeah, so let me pick on a couple of things that Anita has said, because she's nearly answered that question for us. What I would firstly do is to determine what type of sustainable outcome you want to achieve. So a lot of people straight away jump in and try to measure and implement, but actually rather take stock and say, if you're delivering a particular project, what is the outcome you wish to achieve? And generally develop that project then about achieving that outcome. So when we look at how do we know it's having a positive effect, you know, picking on what Anita said, data becomes really important. We need to be able to measure, we need to be able to benchmark in terms of our emissions. You need to be setting credible targets that can be backed up with these plans. And the plans themselves are about reducing emissions across the value chain. So this is coming really to, if you look at your own building, that's one piece in terms of your scope of emissions, but really it's up and down your value chain and how you engage with your suppliers, how you engage with your transportation, how you engage with other collaborators within your business, and how you work with them in terms of reducing your emissions, because ultimately they're all contributing towards your emission portfolio. But you need to be able to measure it and reduce it. And I'll give you a couple of examples. Arup are involved. Okay, we have 16,000 staff, so we've quite a big footprint globally. But we try to get involved in the most sustainably productive projects and the ones that can drive sustainable outcomes. So a recent example was we were working with the Metro of Copenhagen in terms of how you would reduce their embodied carbon. And of course, all these large scale infrastructure projects have a lot of carbon that goes into construction. But actually we adopted a timber materials approach to the Metro, and we reduced their carbon by 50%. Now, in another scenario, we did the same thing for Brisbane in Australia, but it was about renewable electricity in terms of electrification of their metro. Now, there are other aspects, and I don't want to think that by mitigating climate, you have actually solved it, because there is an adaptation and there's a resilience dimension also in terms of sustainability. So when we were working with the city of Hong Kong, we used their seawater in terms of district cooling. So rather than an exploitation in terms of different types of coolants that have impacts in terms of the environment, we utilized a natural resource which they had, which was their seawater. And in the same region, we worked with Singapore in terms of low emissions development strategy and looking at their particular fuel mix. So there's lots of different approaches you can make in terms from a decarbonization perspective and also from a resilience perspective. But one of the ones I particularly like is not a million miles from us here in London, over in London, where we reused a lot of the waste heat that was coming from the London Underground in terms of utilizing that resource for other purposes. And I think these are the types of things that will deliver sustainable outcomes, but they need to be measured, they need to be benchmarked, and actually you need to show that it's not just a plan or a target, you actually need to show concrete improvements in achievement of those plans and targets with the intent of delivering on your own outcomes.
Thanks, Matt. It's really reassuring to hear some of the really positive things that have happened and to know that you have like statistics on it and you have measured it. So it's good to know that that's happening. And Luke, actually, I might go over to you now. Just to find out, you had mentioned in your bio about research that you're doing. Could you tell us a little bit more about it and how it will help us in the future?
Yeah, sure, no problem. So my research and my role in the National Network Local Connections Programme covers a number of different projects, and I'll give you a few examples. So we're partnered with the Electric Power Research Institute, or EPRI in America, and we're developing a data analytics and GIS software tool, which is going to fix and fill in the gaps in our LV maps and our LV electrical model so that we'll better understand what way our customers are connected. And we're also developing an AI image recognition tool that's going to use images of our electrical network from Google Street View so that we can better assess what way, again, our customers are connected to our network. But what I'll talk about today is the work I'm doing at the minute on developing a device that's going to actively measure our low voltage networks. So currently at home, your house is connected to a low voltage network, and that then connects back to a substation, and that substation will feed your entire housing estate. And at the present moment, these assets out there are completely passive, and we have no active or real-time view of what's happening on our low voltage network in terms of voltage, power flow, or power quality, or any parameters like that. So what we're developing, or what I'm developing, is an Internet of Things or an IoT device that we're going to deploy to our substations around the system. And these devices will measure all those parameters that I just mentioned in real time. This information is going to be fed back into our advanced distribution management system, and it's going to be leveraged with our existing SCADA data and our existing operations management system so that we can get a more complete view of what's happening on our network. Now, why this is important is because this is part of the information that we'll be sharing with customers so that they can make their more informed decisions. When we, ESB, know what's happening on our low voltage networks, our customers will know too, and then they can decide when to deploy their low carbon technologies, like their heat pumps and their solar panels and their car chargers. Equally, when we know what's happening on our low voltage network, and we know that supply and demand is tight, we can also then request the customers feed out from their solar PV panels or their battery storage. And this is how then customers can participate in their local markets. When we know that the supply and demand is tight, customers can feed out onto the grid and they can help power their neighbours' houses. This solution provides carbon-free electricity in local markets and creates these circular economies that were mentioned today. And customers then, again, will also have an active role in the climate solution.
Thanks, Luke. That's fascinating. It's a really good look with development, and I hope it's not too far away.
No, it'll be happening soon.
Okay, great. I'll be watching out, and I'll be excited to know that I knew the person behind it, or I got to speak to the person behind it. Joan, I might pass over to you now. What would you consider to be the biggest action the IT industry are taking to improve sustainability?
Yeah, that's a big one. Luke has just given a great example there of IT and how it can help. I mean, IT is going to be part of all of the solutions, I believe. And I think also from what Matt and Anita referred to, it's all linked. We're all looking at strategy around the project-based, setting the baselines, putting the mechanisms in place. What is it that we're going after? What improvements are we going to put in place? How are we going to do it? Set the baselines, go for the timelines, etc., and achieve those goals. And I think there are none better than the IT industry for doing those type of things. And then you've got the commercial aspects, you've got the operational and the functional. But when thinking about this question, I was looking at, what exactly are we defining in the IT industry specifically? And it is around how can we minimize the negative impacts and maximize the positive of the human behavior on the environment through the use of IT and IT-enabled products and services. And that's throughout the life cycle of both those products and services. And so a couple of examples, I think, are around the greening of computer waste. Most IT companies are hugely involved in making sure that there is removal of harmful chemicals on the actual products themselves when they come end of life, but then also repurposing of the products themselves and sending on to countries that can make use of those products and get more use out of them. I think another huge area will be around the IT changes that will come out of yet again, the remote working environment and the changes in lifestyle. IT will be very key to all of those changes, I believe. And that's through, even an example of today, Zoom. We're all using it so much more. It's going to be taking us off the streets. It's going to, on a very practical level, it's going to have those effects of just changing the way we work. And then I think, lastly, it's been very topical over the last few weeks in Ireland, particularly around data center management and the exploration of cleaner technologies in data center management. And there are areas that are being currently looked at, which is around long-term power purchasing agreements with electricity providers, which would allow data center operators to run their infrastructure on an almost decarbonized green energy. So that's one area, but the challenge that's currently being looked at is the backup power systems. They're traditionally used from fossil or generated from fossil fuels. And so there is work around the exploration of what can we do in that area. Lithium-ion batteries, for example, is something that's been looked at as a potential for decreasing the need for the reliance on those fossil fuels. So yeah, IT is going to be part of the overall solution, I think, in all of the areas that are being worked.
Thanks, Joan. And again, thanks for your really good examples, things that are really relatable. And I agree, I think IT is going to be playing a huge role. And on that, I might actually just stay with you for a minute. There was a question put in around what types of careers are available in these areas, specifically asked you in regards to focusing on climate change and sustainability. So if students were thinking they might be in computing or in this area and they're thinking that they're interested in giving back or doing something in climate change sustainability, what would it look like for them, basically?
Yeah, well, great question. I think the opportunities are going to be huge. I think overall the industry is working out what specific areas, what specific roles will become available for those students who are going to be coming to the market in the next 2 or 3 years. But what I would absolutely say is that no matter what the roles, I think transferable skills are going to be very important. And I think we talked about it earlier around project management skills, organizational skills, program management, good communication skills. There's going to be a lot of skills in influencing others and bringing others on board. Being able to describe the big picture. Engineering, of course, I mean, we're always trying to get more and more people involved in engineering, and in particular, women. If we can get more girls and women involved in the engineering side of things, there's going to be huge opportunity there. And then as well across the operations. So there's going to be huge changes in operational activity in most companies, I think, in all industries. And so that's going to be key areas for roles to change, I believe, in the operational side. And then I was thinking of, how can students today, how can they get involved? And how can they even build on those skills? And I would say for internships, to try and get an internship, even at a company that you admire, whom you believe have good ethics and are working towards a sustainable environmental approach. Always work on your people and business skills. Always try and keep abreast of the changes that are happening in the world, and in particular with businesses. I would say volunteer. There's always opportunities for volunteering in the community and beyond. Start a green project. We do that even in Work Human, where we promote and encourage people to get involved in green projects. And that doesn't necessarily have to be just within the company. It's outside of the company, it's within the community, what green projects are going on in our local areas. And then lastly, join the Sustainability Association. These are really good areas to get involved with if you're thinking that you want to work in the overall sustainable operational areas of business. It'll be a great foundation for something to bring to a company when you do finally leave college and join the companies, the big wide world out there.
Thanks, Joan. There certainly is a big wide world out there. I think you've actually given some really good advice to the students there in terms of thinking about what skills will be important and what people are looking for, and really good ideas in terms of, thinking about volunteering or being involved in green projects. All that would look good if this is an area they wanted to get into. So thanks, Joan. And Luke, I might actually go back to you now. And I know you started with the ESB as an apprentice. And I just wanted to ask, how did the ESB Networks Apprenticeship Program prepare you for working in the area of climate change and sustainability?
Yeah, thanks, Therese. Well, so like you said, I worked as an electrical apprentice for ESB Networks. It's something I started doing as soon as I left school. And while I worked there as an apprentice, I worked constructing overhead network, fixing underground network, and working in operations, doing fault hunting on LV, low voltage, medium voltage, and high voltage networks. And during this time, I developed a lot of skills and a lot of knowledge about ESB's distribution network, but just about distribution networks in general. And those skills and that knowledge that I gained is absolutely the cornerstone to the job that I'm doing today, because I wouldn't be able to sit down and design a low voltage monitor for a substation if I didn't understand what the substation was and what it did and how it fit together. So I wouldn't be in the job that I'm in today if I didn't understand how the distribution network fit together and how it worked. And I think that if there's anybody out there that's listening to this that's considering joining an apprenticeship, either as an electrician or as any trade at all, I think it's an absolutely fantastic thing to do. Like the number one thing about it that's brilliant is you get paid while you learn, which is fantastic. But also it's just a great time to be working as an electrician or in a trade, because like I said earlier on, 1 in 4 homes is going to have a heat pump in the next couple of years, and there's going to be a huge number of tradespeople required to install them, from the electrical and the plumbing and the carpentry that's involved in that. So the government last week or this week in their budget announced that they're spending 34 million euros on apprenticeships. So there's loads of desire out there from the government, from the top down, to have people in working in trades. And they've also announced in their budget as well that they're spending 700 million euros of an investment towards their climate action plans. So not only is there going to be loads of work for apprentices, but there's going to be loads of work for tradespeople and engineers and anybody in the field of sustainable energy and climate change.
Thanks, Luke. It sounds like your time as an apprenticeship was a great foundation for you to get to where you are today. And it's amazing to see the kind of career progression that you can have. So thank you. And Matt, I might go back to you now. There was a question put in, and I think this is a really valid one. Do you think, with all the experience that you have, that teaching about sustainable development in schools and in other training programs could play a vital role in addressing climate change and sustainability?
Yeah, so thanks, Trace. This is a really big question because it's ultimately, if you think of the universities at our second level, they're at the edge in terms of understanding where the market is. So understanding where market opportunities are for individuals when they're leaving ITs or they're leaving universities and they're coming into the marketplace. So preparing students to have the skill set to respond to what the market requires. And that skill set at the moment, you could argue, based on what Luke has said as well, is that it's heavily around sustainability, heavily around climate. And actually, it just shows the diversity of climate and sustainability and how it cuts across nearly every sector and every discipline. But it actually falls to, I'm putting no pressure on TU Dublin, but it falls to the lecturers, the teachers in second level, and the lecturers in places like TU Dublin to prepare the students and give them the grounding and the basic knowledge about what the market would expect from them when they leave. And that is often around, and it's not just around engineering, there's a technical side to it, but it actually shows the multidisciplinary nature of it. Going back to me, I was in college in the 1990s. You know, you could not find a course on sustainability in the 1990s. You could not, if you could do a generic engineering course, but if you wanted to do different modules in different disciplines, it was a real challenge for the universities or the ITs. What I think now is they have actually responded and become more multidisciplinary, because picking on what Joan said, the market needs you to be more responsible and more flexible and more responsive to what organizations require. And I'll give you an example. We're doing a little bit of work at the moment with the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development, and they fund green city action plans. So I'm trying to identify what's the skill set of the team to go into deliver on the green city action plan. And of course, there's engineering, you have a technical discipline, but you also have, there's behavior, there's change management, there's psychology that's required. There's also urban design, landscape architecture, there's ecology. So there's energy economics. There's all these different disciplines that are required within the team to be able to deliver on a climate city action plan that actually, because there's a tendency in Ireland to think that, well, our climate problem is an energy problem and our energy problem can be solved with wind. And that's very reductionist. It's a very small part of what universities and ITs are trying to deliver. They're trying to shape a multiple different portfolio for their students in terms of giving them understanding of the importance of nature-based solutions, the importance of different types of engineering, be it from electrical to mechanical to structural to chemical, and also going even further, giving them an understanding of geography, an understanding of economics, and all of these different dimensions. And it's the third level and the second level that are preparing the citizens, let's call them, in terms of action, because ultimately the climate action will fall to being pushed by the citizens and having the citizens to act and lead in many ways where the country is going in terms of meeting its future commitments. So no pressure, Trace, but it all falls to TU Dublin to solve.
Oh, yeah, it sounds like it does. It sounds like from what you're saying that we've started, but there's a lot more to do. And also that, you know, this is going to be important. It's a part of all sectors. And so it'll have to be integrated in all programs, really, in order for it to make a difference and as safe for the citizens to take it on and to understand how to take action. So thanks, Matt. And finally, Anita, I'm going to come back to you. Feels like we haven't chatted to you in ages now. And a question came through, and I think it's a really important one to address before we finish up. And that is, how do we promote sustainable development?
So, Therese, I think that's an easy bit. Unlike Matt and many of us, our students today, they are bombarded by information from all sides. So for them, it's whether it's the social media, what they read, what their friends are doing, And if it is about Greta, who goes and says blah, 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 I think there's a lot of movement around these students today, and they can already connect themselves to, why sustainability is absolutely a centerpiece. I think the more important question that we should be asking ourselves as these students start out their careers is back to what Luke said. He connected it with the core skill he was passionate about. And from that, he stemmed out that what is the right way that I can continue doing my skills, but how do I make a better world out of it? And that, I think, is very important, because when you connect it back to what you are passionate about, you are able to drive it in a much more faster, positive way. Because Luke understood the complexity of driving that change, he's able to act on that much quickly to anybody else that, who was given that as a task. So I think connecting it back to what your core skills are, and then helping do businesses in the right way, I think that's going to be extremely important. And as Matt shared, back in my university, for me, when I saw an SAP implementation, it was an eye-opener that how efficient digital technologies can be. Even though my first 5-6 years were on digital technology, but then to me, it was still like businesses are not doing it in the right way for the planet. And then I started to bring that into the equation because I had already excelled on those skills. So I think the sustainable development, the information will be all around our students, all around us. But what do we take to ourselves where we are truly, empowered to drive the change? And that goes back to what Joanne said earlier, because ultimately we all are humans, right? We can be on Zoom, we can be in physical meetings. When these things come together, that what you are passionate about, and how can that help drive sustainable change, that's where you see teams coming together, thrive. And when teams thrive, I think the businesses move forward. So I think connecting these pieces are extremely important. And I think with webinars like these, students can already start to think for themselves, right? Where do they see themselves in the next 2 years, where they connect the best of their, the strengths that they have to bring it to some of the roles that Joanne mentioned, and then charting out a career from there.
Thanks, Anita. That's brilliant advice to connect it back to what you feel like your strengths are and drive it from there. So I just want to say thanks to all the panelists today. You've been absolutely amazing. Thanks for your time and for sharing your knowledge and for sharing your passion. It's really, really obvious that you're all connected to your core strengths and drove what you value from there. So just to say thanks a million. And before I forget, I just want to remind everyone to do the survey. So don't forget, that kind of helps us inform future webinars and hopefully helps us improve them. We're also going to run another webinar on the 25th of November, where we'll be looking at the creative aspects of careers in apprenticeship, computing and engineering. And if there is questions that have come into the chat that we haven't been able to address, we haven't answered, we'll try to record them and make sure that we can get back to you with the responses from the panelists. So that's it. Thanks again for attending, and thanks again to all the panelists. And we look forward to getting your feedback.